Thanks, Lily. Welcome, everybody, to the morning panel on Cybersecurity Beyond the Kill Switch. My name is Greg Nojon. I'm the Director of the Project on Freedom, Security, and Technology at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're a nonprofit organization here in D.C. Look, we could spend the whole panel talking about kill switch issues. And what we are trying to do with this panel, and there's another panel on cybersecurity and civil liberties later in the conference, is to get beyond the kill switch. So it's going to come up. We're going to talk about it somewhat, but we want to go beyond the kill switch and start to talk about some of the other issues. And they're important. These other issues range from things like whether the government should be dictating standards for hardware and software that's used in critical infrastructure, whether information sharing for cybersecurity purposes is going to include streams of communications traffic that would have a really awful impact on privacy. What's the role of the Department of Homeland Security, the role of the military in conducting cybersecurity activities as compared to industry? Who does what, and who gets to see the communications traffic as it flows? And also, is the administration living up to its pledge, the pledge that the president made when he unveiled the cyberspace policy review, which was that the government won't be monitoring private internet traffic as part of its cybersecurity program? And finally, and this will lead into what Mona was saying, what's happening on cybersecurity abroad? What are other countries demanding of companies that would facilitate surveillance in those countries? And how should the companies react? And is there a collective mechanism, some principles that they could abide by when figuring out how to respond to those requests from foreign governments? We have a great panel to kick off this debate, and I'll now introduce them. Liesl Franz, the Vice President for Cybersecurity and Global Public Policy at Tech America, will kick us off. She serves on the Information Technology Sector Coordinating Council under the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, and she previously worked at the Department of Homeland Security. She'll be giving us the industry perspective on current cybersecurity legislation and some do's and don'ts for Congress. Micah Schur, immediately to my right, is a professor of computer science here at Georgetown University. He specializes in privacy-preserving technologies, network intrusion detection, and interception and eavesdropping systems. And his current research examines the security properties of legally authorized wiretap systems. He'll discuss the technology challenges associated with cybersecurity policy and help us begin to gain an understanding of cybersecurity information sharing at the technical level. And then Susan Morgan, right over here, she's the director of the Global Network Initiative. It's a multi-stakeholder group of companies, civil society organizations, investors, and academics. They've coordinated to develop a set of principles that guide company conduct worldwide to protect freedom of expression and privacy in the ICT sector. Susan will be addressing the international implications of U.S. cybersecurity policies and the impact of what foreign governments are doing here in the United States. Michael Seeds will close out the panel. Michael is the legislative director for Mac Thornberry of Texas. Thornberry is the vice chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and he chairs the subcommittee on emerging threats and capabilities. The Speaker of the House, Representative Boehner, tapped Mr. Thornberry to coordinate all the House committee activity on cybersecurity legislation, which puts Michael right at the center of the storm when it comes to cybersecurity legislation. I want to give a special thanks to CDT's Joshua Gruenspeck. He's our cybersecurity fellow. He pulled this panel together. Thank you very much, Joshua. This isn't a yays and boos panel, but we will provide opportunities for you to participate. Certainly applause is always an appropriate participation. And after some short presentations, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and even make short statements from the audience. No further ado, Liesl, won't you please kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Greg, and thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And with Greg's outline, it's a tall order, but I think we'll try to fill it. For those that aren't familiar with Tech America, it is a industry trade association representing the technology industry. We have over 1,000 members across the country, spanning sort of the spectrum of the technology industry as well as small, medium, and large companies. So we take a very broad and holistic view of the technology industry, and it encompasses a lot of the companies and products and services that you all are talking about in this conference. So we have been very, very much engaged in the policy discussion around cybersecurity, privacy, global free flows of information, activities online, and I think have a very robust engagement with our policymakers about what those issues are for the companies and our customers. I'll take just 2 seconds to talk about the kill switch and to say that based on what I hear and what I understand, that it's really infeasible to happen here in the U.S. and the way that our information systems are networked and architected. And it is even more important then that we have an ongoing dialogue with our policymakers. And I think that's the biggest do, I would say, for policymakers, not just in Congress, but in the administration as well, to make sure that we establish an environment for engagement, to talk about incidents, to talk about preparation, to talk about how we respond to cyber attacks. And that leads me to sort of my biggest message here today, I think, is about partnership. The partnership between industry and government, particularly in preparing for and responding to cyber attacks that do happen. And so I would say that another do for Congress is to enable that partnership to happen. We've talked a lot about the framework for partnership recently at Tech America and with some of our colleagues in the industry association world. And what is it? Today it is as Greg mentioned, I serve on the IT Sector Coordinating Council, and that is a technology industry component of the National Infrastructure Protection Plan that was created in the Bush administration at the Department of Homeland Security and its sister agencies for engagement between government and the industry on risk management. And so the sector has invested a lot of time and resources in working with our government partners to figure out just what that means, how we work together, what industry should do to manage its risk better, and particularly for our industry, which provides products and services to all the other industries, how we work across those sectors to manage the risks that we see. And information sharing is probably a huge part of that. What is information sharing? And a lot of people are now starting to talk about information exchange rather than information sharing, because it really is not just information sharing about incidents or intrusions for information sharing's sake, but what is shared, with whom, and why are really the most important aspects of the discussion. The why is really to prepare and respond, not just so that there's terabytes of information floating around that no one knows what to do with. So what is the valuable information? How do we share it in a two-way way so that it's not just requirements for industry to share all their data with the government and then get nothing for it? And what I mean by that is there's got to be a value loop. If companies share information with government, they kind of would expect there to be some value coming out of that, whether it's, well, here's what we have, which is something we don't get very often, and here's how what we have has an analysis about it that then gives us actionable information, things we can actually do, things that government can do to better combat or defend against things that are happening on our networks. I think, too, a huge part of that is trust. can we as companies share that information without retribution for sharing that information? And that means for us as the network provider or the service provider, but also in many cases for our customers, whether it is another company or whether it's a consumer or a set of consumers. That mechanisms for that kind of exchange are not really well bolstered, I'd say, in legislation. That would be another thing I would say is do enable that ability for information exchange to happen in that way. I think lastly, in sort of the context of partnership and information sharing, how can we as industry and government better share information, partner and collaborate with our international partners? Cyberspace is borderless. These incidents occur across the globe in internet speed, and there's no one entity or one aspect of an entity or even in many cases one government that can combat or defend against a cyber attack that's crossing the globe. And so we really need to build those partnerships globally in order to be able to collaborate better. And I would say that's another do. Enable that part of the discussion to occur as well. The last thing I would say is a don't. Don't restrict companies or the internet in a way that constrains it from being able to move in a flexible, dynamic manner. This is the fastest moving industrial resource that we've seen in our time, or even before our time. And so we need to be able to respond and share information in a flexible, dynamic way. And it's very hard to legislate in that kind of environment. So take a do no harm approach as we've engaged in our conversations, and enable the environment to thrive, innovate, defend, and be flexible in order to do all those things. I think my time is up.
Thanks, Liesl. The administration living up to its pledge, the pledge that the president made when he unveiled the cyberspace policy review, which was that the government won't be monitoring private internet traffic as part of its cybersecurity program. And finally, and this will lead into what Mona was saying, what's happening on cybersecurity abroad? What are other countries demanding of companies that would facilitate surveillance? And there's another panel on cybersecurity and civil liberties later in the conference, is to get beyond the kill switch. So it's going to come up. We're going to talk about it somewhat, but we want to go beyond the kill switch and start to talk about some of the other issues. And they're important. These other issues range from things like whether the government should be dictating standards for hardware and software that's used in critical infrastructure, whether those countries, and how should the companies react, and is there a collective mechanism, some principles that they could abide by when figuring out how to respond to those requests from foreign governments. We have a great panel to kick off this debate, and I'll now introduce them. Liesl Franz, the Vice President for Cybersecurity and Global Public Policy at Tech America, will kick us off. Thanks, Lily. Welcome, everybody, to the morning panel on Cybersecurity Beyond the Kill Switch. My name is Greg Nojon. I'm the Director of the Project on Freedom, Security, and Technology at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're a nonprofit organization here in D.C. Look, we could spend the whole panel talking about kill switch issues. And what we are trying to do with this panel, information sharing for cybersecurity purposes, is going to include streams of communications traffic that would have a really awful impact on privacy. What's the role of the Department of Homeland Security, the role of the military in conducting cybersecurity activities as compared to industry? Who does what, and who gets to see the communications traffic as it flows? And also, what's